Testing. I'll call this meeting of the school committee for the city of Lewiston, Maine to order for Monday, March 13th, 2023. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will do school committee member introductions. We'll start with Ms. Scott.
Linda Scott, Lewiston City Council Representative.
Paul Beauplan, Ward 7 Representative.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Jake Langley, Superintendent.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Hannah Diwali, Senior Representative.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Are there any items that members would like to have removed from the consent agenda set aside at this time? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted. The next item is item 4, is to receive and potentially vote on the Renew America Schools Energy Improvements Grant application. I guess Mr. Grant will present the grant application, so we'll call this Grants.
So as you know, as part of our policy, when we're applying for a grant, we have to come before the school committee to just present what our plan is and then get approval from the school committee to move forward with the grant. So the Renew American grants were released. You can see from this slide, they have a timeline at the very bottom, but it was released in November. And we were at the same time in conversations with Johnson Controls for the energy performance contract. And when this grant came out, it speaks specifically to performance contract type work. So the way that the Johnson Controls with a performance contract would work is you borrow money, and through the energy savings, that's how you offset the payment that you have for that borrowed money. And this grant allows us to apply for that and not have to borrow the money or nearly as much money. And so what we're looking to do is work with Johnson Controls. We did a concept paper, which was essentially a pre-application process. And from that, they say you're encouraged to apply or discouraged to apply. And fortunately, we got the encouraged to apply. So that's a very promising thing. And so we want to begin the next steps of writing a grant to be submitted April 21st.
Ms. Whitlow.
Thank you. What is the amount of the improvements or the energy improvements?
So we would be looking at about 4 million. We'd be applying for about $4 million
for the grant amount.
for the grant.
But what amount will we be responsible for? Is there like a certain project?
So they do have a 90%, and we would probably be looking at performance contract work there again, so that it would be any amount that we would have to borrow would be offset by energy savings.
So what you said was that would cover 90%
Yeah.
of whatever. When you submit the application, do you have to give a dollar amount of?
Yeah,
what the
we will
project
give
is?
a dollar amount. Yeah.
Okay.
And then it'll be in about that $4 million figure, plus or minus a few $100,000.
Ms. Hurd.
Thank you. Will the work go out to bid, or are we stuck with Johnson Controls? Like, what are our options there?
So the work will probably work, we'll be working with the performance contracts, and that's essentially how the performance contracts work, that you're working with that contractor, and then they'll get bids and prices with it. They kind of act as the GC for it. So it will not be like our regular procurement policy where we would go out to complete bid for the whole projects or all the projects.
Is there a reason for that?
The way that this grant is actually set up, if you look in who can apply, and the legislation kind of specifies that it can be a school department. And then the second is that you kind of join up with an energy, a performance energy company to put the grant application together. And it's very specific to those. And actually, the way that I see the grant reads is very specific to a performance contract.
Okay, so my only concern is when Johnson Controls came and presented to us, I wasn't particularly thrilled with what they were offering, I guess. As they were saying, oh, we're going to replace all your light bulbs, but your return on investment is like 20 years, but the lifetime of an energy efficiently light bulb isn't even 20 years. So that's my concern, is that it's,
And that was our concern, kind of the whole way with the performance contract. The way that they presented it was going to be a contract for 20 years. And really in 20 years, many of us aren't even going to be here, and how we can do that. So the work that they were going to do does have a return on investment. There will be some flexibilities. I'm sure we'll be talking with the facilities committee about what kind of projects we want to do. I'm hoping that it's going to be somewhat fluid, because it would be maybe a multi-year project. So if other things could be done, we can do those. But the important thing with this is Lewiston isn't having to borrow that money and be on the hook for 20 years. We would be getting a grant for the lion's share of it to do the work.
Thank you. So I guess my question is, any of these projects that are, eligible for this grant that we would use this money for. Is that in our current budget right now that we're looking at? Like, that money?
No, not in our general fund budget. These projects would not be part of that.
Okay, so this isn't gonna save us any money on our budget if we get approved for this. I guess that's my question.
Other energy savings. So as opposed to the offset in the performance contract, right? So if you have $20,000 in savings, we would have had a $20,000 in savings, but we would have had a $20,000 loan to pay back. We would get those energy savings right up front because we would be having the money. So
When do you find out if we're awarded this grant or not?
so kind of basing on when the concept papers, it took about a month, 6 weeks to get the final information. So I'm guessing if it's due on April 21st, that it would be a couple months after that, 6 weeks.
Mr. Beauplan.
Thank you. Could you just reiterate why we're going with a for-profit company rather than a nonprofit community partner?
So the work that this kind of goes back and again, these things kind of aligning up and coinciding together. So we went out to RFQ with the city to do performance contracts, and the school department went with that. We have a performance contract that we haven't acted on. So all of that work and the energy audits and everything of our schools have already happened. And so it seemed like a logical path to go with Johnson Controls because they fit that second part of who you can partner with. And we had kind of a performance contract already put forth with projects and savings and everything. So a lot of the legwork, or I should say a lion's share of the legwork was already done.
Mr. Superintendent.
So just want to add that, so we got into this conversation because the prior conversation was going to cost us money. We didn't like some of the cost savings estimates, as this member had mentioned. We also had, I'll say a local expert on the panel, which member Hurd knows, her husband's actually in the field. So it was very helpful to have that insight. And so that's what steered us away from coming to say, in the budget, we want to ask for millions or take out this loan to do the work that, is everything from weather stripping to light bulbs, energy efficiencies that are not overly costly. And we had some other small projects rolled in, like some new lighting fixtures that were outside and poles and things like that, to improve spaces. But not that all of that is rolled into this potential, but what is rolled into this potential is that we're not taking out a loan. And so the cost savings, which again, we had insight on, I think we've been really deliberate in trying to approach this in a way that doesn't cost us a bunch of money because of what we came to learn about the potential cost savings. That potential is a key word, but mortgage is real. And I think we got real about the percentage, and this is a way to stay away from the mortgage. That's why we wanted to bring it back to you. I also want to add that, remember, Beauplan, to your question, we actually pondered who would be a nonprofit partner for this. And for something of our size, scalable buildings, 10 buildings or so, and try to do this work, I didn't know of a nonprofit that would engage in that kind of work on that scale. So we did bat it around, but JCI also brings that, as Bill mentioned, that general contractor-like approach. So they'll work with subs in the community. And where these dollars are tied to grant, state, and federal type funding, they'll have to meet certain obligations anyway because of the way the funds are distributed.
Anyone else with questions? Ms. Hurd.
Thank you. I don't really have a question per se. I think this is a great idea. I think going for the grant is a great idea. Again, my only hesitation is I saw the presentation and the way that JCI acted when we were talking about taking a loan for money. Now we're saying we're not taking a loan. This is actually like grant money. We didn't have to like pull this from our budget. So like if that's how they were when we were talking about getting a loan and taking out this money, I'm just concerned about how it's going to be when it's quote unquote free money, I guess, is my only concern. They weren't super excited about saving us money and worried about the bottom dollar and how much we were taking when we were taking on a loan. So where are they going to be when we quote unquote have free money?
Well, I think we're still going to have some say on what the projects were. And that was one of the things that was happening when we looked at the JCI performance contract with the facilities committee was, look, 20 years to do these projects is way too much. And again, just looking at our comfort level of saying, we're not going to be here in 20 years, and somebody's going to be sitting there saying, in the school committee saying, well, what are we paying this off for on year, 15, 16? And so they were actually, before this came out, kind of in the works of saying, okay, if that's not what you want in 20 years, what kind of projects could we do with within, say, a 10 or 15 year? So that was kind of something that they were going about. And then this came out. The other thing is that the COVID money kind of played into what JCI projects were going to actually happen. So there's the big project at the high school and the middle schools. And so that was kind of like stuff that we might have seen from Johnson Controls, but because we already kind of had that stuff in the pipeline, they stayed away from those things. So.
I think it's also informative to know that JCI actually helped Bill develop this grant. They were integral in getting this, and I think that partly because of their expertise, it helped us make sure that we did hit the markers, and so that we did get the green light to go ahead and apply. They've so far they've been a pretty good partner for us, although not a lot has happened, but at least that's my perception of it at the moment. Ms. Bowden.
Thanks. I just have one more question. If we go ahead and upgrade to this energy efficient stuff, what are we looking at cost wise for an increase if things break or things need to be repaired? It seems like it would be much more expensive to fix all of these upgrades than what we currently have. So do you have any insight on that?
I don't have actual insight as far as what the cost may be, but obviously everything does need to be upgraded, right? One of our big holdups with the original Johnson Control performance contract was like lighting. So we're going to pay a 20-year mortgage essentially on getting new lights, and those lights have a 10 to 15-year life. So before the amount is completely paid off, we're going to be replacing some of those things. Now, we do know we need to go to LED lighting. But we also knew we couldn't take out a 20-year loan to get that LED lighting that is going to start needing to be replaced within 10 years. So, this, again, you start to see those savings immediately on that example of the lighting. And then in hopes that in 15 years, you actually are kind of ahead of the game. You weren't doing a like for like, you were actually having the savings right up front so that in 15 years, when that does come to the end of its life, you're able to replace.
Mr. Bockel.
Thank you. I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but in replacement of lighting, has there been any thought of giving the type of setup that when you leave the room, the lights shut off? Because maybe it's my age, just kills me to see lights in an unused building. Thank you.
Yeah. And that was actually, again, before this grant came out, we were continuing our work with JCI. We were actually talking about the lighting thing. And that was the example that continued to reoccur. Like we're going to take us 20 years to pay off this lighting. We'll have energy savings, but what about the replacement? And they actually were talking about wall controls and maybe they come back and they put together a project that had that. But I think that would definitely be in the cards for energy efficiency. And I'm with you on seeing the light on.
I think one of the things that's important to understand, though, that cycling lights, even LEDs, cycling them repeatedly shortens their life. Almost thinking about integrating lighting controls with the central building control system so that when we think the buildings are going to be occupied is when they'd be enabled. And if you cycle them on and off 15 times a day just because somebody walked into a room, you'll shorten the life of those fixtures regardless of what they are significantly. So I agree with you. I go around my office every day turning the lights off, but we've seen it ourselves that the more you cycle them, the shorter the lifespan. It just seems to be the nature of the beast. Anyone else with questions, comments? Jake?
I don't want to drag it out, but one thing I do want to add, and we've had challenges with in some of our newer schools, are those controls and those sensors, because they fade, they burn out, they don't work all the time. And repairing them with obsolete parts has become a challenge. And so to your question, Janet, you may see some systems that are not maintenance free per se, but we're gonna be very mindful of that. Josh has some insight on those controls because we had a district electrician who has now retired, and he's trying to teach our new guy how to work the sensors and the Lutron, right, switches that come back down to the wall. But it's those little intricate pieces between talking with like Bruce, Josh, Greg will, I'm sure, chime in once we have a workup done. It's very helpful. But again, at the end of the day, this is also grant money and not a mortgage. So,
And that's just the part I want to highlight is performance contracts, as I've learned over the past year, are very common things for schools to get because it allows you to upgrade certain things and then get an energy savings so that you can pay for it and actually do the upgrades without having a major impact on your budget. But as we've gone through this, I think in some ways we're lucky that this came out when it did, because it allows us to say, well, wait a minute, we can do this performance contract. But now the federal government just released these grants, and instead of us having to borrow the money at, whatever the interest rate may be, we can get this federal grant to do it. So I can't say that, hopefully I'm here for a while, but that will never come back to you and say, hey, we want to look to do a performance contract. But I think it's important we do our homework to say, okay, well, how can we pay for that performance contract? And if there's actual money there to do it, then we should do that before we actually go that route of signing a performance contract that says every year this company will come back and they'll tell us how much we saved so that we can ensure that the amount we're paying to the loan is offset by that savings.
Anyone else? I would entertain a motion on this, on the approval of this. Mr. Beauparlant?
Thank you. I'd like to propose that we positively vote on the Renew America Schools Energy Improvement Grant application.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second by Ms. Scott. Any further, well, just any further discussion? Sorry, Elizabeth, any further discussion? All in favor? So moved. Ms. Whitlow.
Yeah, it kind of goes along with this, but are we seeing like a huge spike in what we're paying for electricity over the last 6 months? I know I am, so I couldn't imagine what the district is.
so two things. One is, no, not yet. We do have a fixed rate over a multi-year agreement, so that helps. What we don't have a fixed rate on is the delivery of the service. And we have included in the budget some percentage increase for electric utility.
I think there, at one point in time too, if you recall, we were in discussions about trying to do something with community solar, and that is still out there. We have not acted on that yet. So that's still one of the topics for the Facilities Committee to investigate. And I think the jury's still out on the advisability of some of those contracts as well, so. The next item on the agenda I'm sorry, Paul.
Thank you. I'm sorry, and can you just explain to me, Bruce, why there's no public session tonight?
No comment.
Thank you. Sorry.
It should be, we can have.
Thank you, Paul. Actually, that's an error in the agenda. We can do, unless anyone objects, we'll do it right now. We would open it to public comment. Anyone who is here would like to address an item either that is on the agenda now, On the agenda at the appropriate time or a non-agenda item at this time could speak, you're limited to 3 minutes. We do not allow comments about personnel. And any of those type of discussions should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate party. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the school committee in public session? Seeing none, I'll close the public section. But thank you, Paul. That's important to know. That we need to do that. The next item on the agenda is agenda item 5 to review and potentially vote on the first reading of the following policies. And I assume we would go through these one at a time, Karen. Do you want to just list them now and then we'll jump back to them? So the policies to be addressed tonight are AC-R, says non-discrimination, equal opportunity and affirmative action grievance procedure. ACAA-R, student discrimination and harassment complaint procedure. ACAD, hazing. AD, educational philosophy mission. ADAA, school system commitment to standards for ethical and responsible behavior. ADC, tobacco-free schools, use and possession of tobacco and electronic smoking devices. ADC-R, tobacco regulations, K-12 students. JFABD, education of homeless students. And JFABD-R, education of homeless students, administrative procedures. And I will return to this to Ms. Paquette, and we'll start with ACR, non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and affirmative action grievance procedure.
Mouthful. So the first two, ACR and ACAA-R, are the procedures that follow two policies that were voted on a first and second read in January. And so now that you voted on those policies and we've now looked at those policies and made sure that the procedure or the procedures matched what the policy actually is. So AC-R, you'll notice that if you look at the redlined option or policy, you'll notice that there was some addition to this policy because of law and the way that procedure needs to happen in order to meet the law. I'm just looking at the so you'll notice that we needed to add the affirmative action officer in this policy. That information was not listed before. You'll notice that we have two folks now acting as the affirmative action officer to give us flexibility if there's a concern with one department or one person, there's another person for someone to work with and make that file that complaint and then can follow the procedure. Are there any questions about this one?
Karen, would you like to vote on these as we go through them to just do a first reading? Or you want to just do them in mass?
I guess that's up to the committee what they'd prefer to do.
Would you rather just address these as they are as a group? Just say, yes, we're good with this one as a first reading?
Unless something comes up, I don't see why we can't just vote on all of them together.
Okay. Okay. I guess proceed, Karen.
Okay. So ACAA-R is the student discrimination and harassment complaint procedure. Again, follows the policy ACAA. So this is just the procedure that we would have students follow if they experience discrimination and or harassment.
Thanks. I was just looking, there are no changes to this?
I'm noticing that it looks like that the red line one was
Omitted from the,
turned into the, hold on, I think I can go back.
okay. I was gonna say, I don't see any changes at all, so.
There were a lot of changes.
So thanks to Google, I'm trying to find the other one. If we can table this one and I can bring it back with the red line. Yes, Linda.
I was just gonna offer that. make a
Oh,
motion.
sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
So I'll make a motion to table ACR and ACAA-R, and I'm only adding both because they correlate with each other. We'll table the first two until our next regular meeting.
So they actually correlate with two different policies. ACR goes with policy AC. And ACAA-R goes with policy ACAA. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just clarifying.
Okay, so it would be the first one, AC-R, right? The non-discrimination, equal opportunity and affirmative action grievance procedure. And then BACAA-R, student discrimination and harassment complaint procedure. Those are the only two on the agenda for tonight, right? I mean, I know the other ones are on there, but those are the only, is the AC, which other one is part of that?
So we're looking at ACAA-R and we don't have the redlined
Right.
version of that one, but they are not, they're not connected to the same policy.
I got it. Okay, I'm sorry. I knew that. I read that, but okay. So just that one, then just BACAA-R to table till the next regular meeting.
So there's a motion on the floor to table discussion about ACAAR. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Ms. Hurd? Any discussion? All in favor? That's unanimous. We'll move on to ACAD.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, ACAD, again, this policy was last revised or reviewed in 2016, and the law has changed. We need to add some additional definitions, as well as clarify what hazing includes. So those things were added. Most of what was already in the policy was left, but we made some additions. Are there any questions on this one?
Comments or questions on ACAD hazing? No. Go ahead, Karen.
So AD is educational philosophy mission. And the policy subcommittee decided that the original policy that we had, we didn't like it, and it didn't seem to fit what we wanted it to say. So we are using the new language you see is updated language from Maine School Management. And we felt as though it captures what we wanted it to say in terms of what the school department and the school committee believes and is working towards.
Questions or comments? Okay,
All right. So ADAA is actually a new, is that the next one? Yeah. Is a new policy for Lewiston Public Schools. It was suggested in our policy manual audit that we add this policy. So it's school system commitment to standards for ethical and responsible behavior.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. So with this being a new policy and some of the language in here says to establish criteria to determine, establish policies and procedures concerning, is there specific other pieces that we're going to be getting on top of this to add with this so that we know what the criteria, the procedures are in moving forward with this new policy?
Yes, many of these things are already established and already are in our policy manual or part of our school district procedures. Or there are laws that require that we do these things. So the answer to your question is yes. All of the updates that we would make or bringing policies to you would fit within, or not just be within this, but could be related to this. And any that we do not will be added.
So it does say here that it's cross-referenced by JIC, Student Code of Conduct, and JKD, suspension of students there. But those are the only two pieces that are already in our existing policy, right? Or are there going to be more to that?
They're not the only two that might be connected, but they're the two that are referenced in terms of the behavior. There are others around IEP procedures and things like that may not need to be in our policy manual, but they need to be part of like a procedures within special ed or something like that. But I can certainly review it and make sure that we do have all those references.
Just to make sure, because this is a new policy, if we have a parent that wants to take a look at this and wants to know what the cross references are in respect to this, and I just want to make sure we're covered here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowden.
Thank you. So just reading through it, there's something in here that it doesn't sit well with me. And I mean, maybe on a procedural level, like we have to adopt this language, but it's bullet point number B on the final page. Where it says, focus on positive and restorative interventions that are consistent with evidence-based practices rather than set punishments for specific behaviors, and avoid zero tolerance practices unless specifically required by federal or state laws, rules, or regulations. I mean, we do have zero tolerance stuff in our district. So is it saying that we shouldn't, or we can no longer have zero tolerance when it comes to things like violence and weapons? I mean, I just want to make sure that that's not contradicting. You know, for example, I know that there's zero tolerance with fighting in our schools right now. And I don't think we should get rid of that and focus on positive interventions instead of zero tolerance when it comes to stuff like that.
I'm just reading the paragraph above to make sure that I have the context for each of the bullets. So the paragraph above those A through D reads, when revising the prescribed consequences for violation of the student code of conduct, the school committee shall consider, evaluate, and revise as deemed necessary or desirable relevant existing district-wide school disciplinary policies and or consider the adoption of new policies that. So it's something that you can consider and you could look at to adopt, but I don't read it that you have to. But it's certainly, this is a first read. So if it's something you want this subcommittee to look at again, we can certainly do that.
I just don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're like shooting ourselves in the foot later,
Mhm.
you know? Thank you.
Ms. Scott,
So just for clarification, does this mean that this particular policy is gonna go back to the committee to look at that piece? Is that what we're saying here? I just want to make sure, because when we go to vote at the end here for the first reading, that would take this out of first reading, wouldn't it?
So the committee could choose to rephrase that. I think what Karen was saying is the way this reads, it says that the school committee will consider those bullet points when making changes to student disciplinary policy. It doesn't mean that they have to or shall or will, as much as just consider. And I would agree with Member Bowden that we do have things that exist now that I don't see going away that are around violence that we won't have in our schools.
So before I bring it back for a second read to the school committee, it's my understanding that you'd like me to check the cross references to this policy, as well as just take a look and make sure we're clear on what that language says about the zero tolerance. Okay. Mhm. Okay. The next one, the next two are about tobacco-free schools. This policy actually has a new name. You'll see that our current policy title is tobacco use and possession. And the title has been expanded to tobacco-free schools, use and possession of tobacco and electronic smoking devices. Again, some additional definitions have been added to this policy. Excuse me, as well as some language around the use of the electronic devices and being more specific about those.
Ms. Bowden,
Sorry, I have to pose the question now that we have weed shops on, every 100 feet in the city, and it's something that's legal. I mean, not for kids that are in school, but tobacco isn't legal for kids in school either. Should this also include language about marijuana use? And I know that's probably in a drug policy, but where it's really not considered a drug anymore, and it's along the same lines as tobacco, and it's being used in vape pens in our school. Should this policy also include that language?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know the legal ramifications of adding that to the tobacco policy, but it's certainly something that I can ask legal about, and cross-reference those other, the policy that does reference drugs.
So I guess I would motion to table this particular policy.
I'll second that. I was kind of thinking the same thing. I wasn't real sure. Like sometimes you can't even differentiate, but yeah, I think it would be important to look into it.
are we going to include both F and G because they're somewhat related?
So I'll just make sure people understand, ADC-R is actually a recommendation to be deleted because that procedure has been added to ADC. So that I guess you could do it however you want. That one was to be deleted, but we can do them both
Favor
together.
that.
Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if we delete then we wouldn't have a tobacco policy.
Yeah,
So we
no,
have to wait.
you're right. Good point. Okay.
So we have a motion to table ADC and ADC-R, the motion by Ms. Bowden and second by Ms. Whitlow. Any discussion? Ms. Scott?
Just one thing I wanted to add, We need to have a bigger discussion around this policy and how this policy is handled in the schools by our administrators. When it says specifically in here that the administrators will be handling, how this is the responsibility for enforcement, we need to talk about this a little bit further. And I'm not saying that our administrators are not doing the best they can, but the conversations I'm having with some of our older students in our high school, this is becoming a very prevalent situation where tobacco use, vaping use, marijuana use is happening right inside our schools. And we just need to talk about it more. So I'd ask that we'd have that conversation, a bigger conversation around that, please.
Okay, so there's a motion to table, all in favor? Okay. Okay, I guess the next one, Karen, is JFABD.
Yes. So the next two policies were formerly policy JLG. So we've taken JLG and we have morphed it into these two policies, one being education of homeless students, and then the procedure for how we go about doing that. So JFAB, so in both of these were guided by new laws, new legislation around our responsibility to educate homeless students and their rights to access certain things. So you'll notice that if you're looking at JFABD, there's a lot, especially at the bottom, that has been it's been striked through. That all of those procedure pieces are on the next policy, which is JFABD. And just to be clear, we have been following the updated law, not our old policy. We've been following the law in terms of identification and providing what we're responsible for providing to our students. Our policy just had not caught up.
Ms. Bowden.
Thank you. So I think that this is also a bigger discussion that I believe this committee should be having, especially where we have the store next door, we have that space. And this policy, this updated policy that you have in front of us says that we shouldn't be segregating our homeless students. And I'm not saying we are segregating them, but I just think it's a larger discussion we have to have as far as, where are these students? Where do they fit into our school system, and are they integrated with the rest of our classes, or are we finding that, we're using that store next door space in the basement of Longley, and that's where they're getting all of their education kind of segregated from everyone else? I don't know the answers to these questions. And so I just wonder if this is a conversation that we need to have.
So students are fully integrated in their enrollment. Yeah.
So if that is the case, I guess I'm just wondering what that space is being used for.
Yeah, the intentions are for, so they have a lot of supplies there, and they have a lot of things come in, get organized, and then go back out. But also to have spaces for after school and evening things. That's the intention of the space. So it's not happening during the school day to that extent.
Okay. All right.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. I had a question as well. And in the top paragraph where it says that the superintendent shall designate a homeless education liaison, or the homeless liaison, do we have a homeless liaison for is it separate from the store next door? Do we have a specific? Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yes. And just to expand on that, the homeless liaison is responsible for all of the laws that are associated with McKinney-Vento, which is a case that ultimately resulted in all of the laws that we now are responsible for, and providing education and other things to our homeless students. So that homeless liaison is responsible for what's listed in here, as well as managing those those funds and making sure those funds are used appropriately.
Mr. Bokalon?
Thank you. Do we have the homeless liaison in attendance here tonight?
We do not. But I can say that he was part of the process of looking at the policies and making sure that they match what we're supposed to be doing, and they do match what we are doing in terms of our process. He also has worked with other liaisons in other districts to look at these policies as well. And we're all using the same language and the same policies.
Anyone else? So at this time, we have set aside section B, which is ACAA-R, student discrimination harassment complaint procedure, and ADC, the tobacco-free schools, and ADCR, the regulations. Those have been tabled. Is there any further discussion on the other 7 items? Mr. Bokalon?
Thank you. I have a few questions on this one that could best be answered by the homeless liaison. Could we invite that person to the next meeting where we have the second reading?
I would assume so.
Yes.
Thank you.
So are you thinking you want to set aside those as well?
No, I just wanted to question before we formally approve it. Thank you.
That being said, I guess I would take a motion to approve the ones that we have not tabled. Scott?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve for the first reading, policy AC-R, policy ACAD, policy AD, policy ADAA, policy JFABD, and policy JFABD/R.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Whitlow. Further discussion? All in favor?
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is to review the following cost center categories as we're in our budget season. There are 7 items that are listed here. We'll start with Article 2, Special Ed. Mr. Superintendent.
So I want to kick off this evening with just a couple of things. First, passed out for you to add into your packets. Just some updates to some questions that have come up. One item being the enrollment trend, which is in chart form available to you. Also, further information about the community liaison position that Member Beauplant wanted a little more information on. Also, we have there was a question from City Councilor around the changes in rates of pay for some of our educators and calculating or sharing that. And also there's a question about van insurance that's included here. That would be for the vehicles that were purchased using Easter dollars. So that is available to you. We've also shared all this information with City Council, and we'll post it with our materials available to everyone else. We did change the schedule last meeting, and again, that was shared out very publicly, but I also want to just recap tonight for those who just watch meetings instead of coming. That tonight we have added other articles above and beyond the original schedule. I think we're able to move through those and answer questions as they came up, or gather questions we can then answer. But we have also designated Wednesday for our administrative team, directors and admin to come, and they have some things they want to share with you, but also want to be available for any questions that you might have. So we've rolled that into Wednesday, and again, shared that update out publicly as far as that schedule change goes. Next Monday, we have a joint meeting with City Council. We can talk about where we're at with things and get some feedback, answer any questions there. But I would encourage all of you, and thank you already for the questions you've been bringing, that you hear from others, and also that you have yourselves. And we can start going through the detail. I'll share highlights like I did last time, but then would like to offer you windows to ask questions about things you see in your binder that might be more of a line. And so I was going to flip to tab 7 again to do that overview piece. And I have some slides I'll share out on the screen. All right, so in Article 2, which starts on page 2 of Articles of tab 7, about a third of the way down. So just some key points. Again, we have salary increases, also including a stipend that was created through negotiations for special ed staff. Benefit increases, and we've talked about insurances numerous times. There's some reorganization of positions to support programming and staff reductions. Numerous reductions from last Wednesday's meeting, when we shared a number of reductions, came by way of special education. There's some ESER supplies that have been rolled back in. And I could stipend in there twice, sorry. And there's also an increase in special purpose private school tuition and transportation, which annually they send us rates, and rates are up significantly, as is travel costs. And so those are some highlights in Article 2. And if it's okay with you, just take a chance to look at some items you see as standouts in Article 2 and share some increased costs. Another one, if you look at line 50, 53, 54, that area down towards the bottom, you see some high percentage increases. Those are costs are overall in our special ed AP roles and changes, and also their clerical staff, things like that. So it's an overall cost. Questions on
Ms. Bowden.
Article 2?
Thank you. I guess so. I guess my biggest question is, with all the restructuring that we did, and the pay increases and the stipends and all of the things to make people want to be in special education, it seems like we have filled most of those roles, correct?
We filled a number of them, but we still work to fill the rest of them.
So I guess what's just like really crazy to me that really stands out is how much we're spending on out of district placements still. I thought the restructuring was supposed to cut back on the out of district placements, and it looks like there's been no change. So can you speak to that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I can some. So a bulk of that is increased costs. The other chunk of this is the increased volume of students who are having significant challenges within our schools. And so they're qualifying for out of district placements. I will say, though, that some of the programs in-house that we've now created, those are growing and those will get legs under them. And so we're hopeful to not need all of that because of how the programs are growing. It's just that it's from my context, it's year one, and we'll continue to improve in that. And then also we have the billing piece, which is generating revenue. So that's up and started to run. So as we have the local pieces of those programs, it'll generate revenue through main care billing. And so that's in the works. So, excuse me, that's happening. And so we anticipate that growing, but that's not in that line. It would show up as a revenue elsewhere.
Where, because I was looking for that and it looked to me like it was zero. It was pretty much zero. So did we end up billing main care? Did we end up doing what we said we'd do last year?
So
Bringing
that's,
in those revenue?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So that is up and happening. There's a delayed response to that because of how you bill out for services and then you wait for the payback. My understanding is money is starting to come in and that will grow over time. Is it perfect yet? No, because we had much to learn. But that revenue is happening. And as far as where is it?
Thank you. When I went over this, I noticed a spot where there should have been that, and it looked like it was very low. So I just can't find it right now, but I was surprised at how low it was. So I'm just hoping that that was not the only place that billing would show up and that there actually is a place where we get the results of that change in practice.
Yeah, and so I think you're asking a great question. So if you look at tab 5, that's our revenue sheet. And that's where it gets into the money coming in. And I'm actually gonna circle this. Yeah. Oh, it's a zero change because we have $400,000 in main care revenue there. That it wouldn't increase necessarily in yes, it used to be zero. So 400,000 was where we were targeting. And then correct. Yeah, and the initial thinking was that was a conservative number and we hope for that to grow and we hope that next year it will. So that could be higher. There's nothing saying it couldn't be higher. And it's taken time to stand it up and get staff that know how to do the billing and make sure all the services are being provided. There's a lot of boxes to check when we submit for billing, but we're there and it's happening. So it'll grow over time. But I do want to note, like it's been an effort to stand it up, but it's there, it's stood up and it's actively happening. And so I would love to come back next year and say that number actual was higher. I just don't want to make promises I can't keep. But it is up and running and main care billing is happening.
Ms. Bowden?
Thank you. So back to Article 2, line 47 and 48 and line 58 and 59. Can you tell me, I mean, they're coded the same way. They both say special education, out of district placement, tuition, K-8, and then 9 to 12. And one of them is $1 million increase, 47 and 48 combined is $1 million increase. And then the other one didn't change, it stayed the same. But what is the difference between those two chunks? Why, I mean, they look like the same thing, but with different numbers. And I'm just curious what's going on with that.
Yeah, so I would say that they get kind of billed separately, and by way of coding, they have to land differently just by grade span. Why K-8 is 8 and 9 through 12 is 2 is largely dependent on the split of both kids we have on waiting lists and the cost of the services that gets provided. And we're also, is that what you're asking?
No, not really. I'm not asking about the numbers so much. I'm asking, like, it looks, they're coded the same way. So
Double entry.
47 and 48 are the exact same code as 58 and 59. Yep, thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. I do see it now. Kara pointed it out.
47, 48 is the actual lines themselves. We budgeted for an extra $1 million for next year because the out of district placements have gone up so high in price rising and for transportation costs. The other one that's 1.4 is the seed portion. So when we have students that are out of district placements, we still have to pay the 33% of the main care revenue for those kids that are outplaced. So like how we're receiving 33% back from the state, we have to pay when they're outplaced to the schools, to the state for their 33%.
I'm assuming that others are as confused as I am by that. I'm not to, You want to try that one more time?
Sure. So for main care billing, there is 33% paid federal, state, and then from the school administrative unit. So we're paying the 33% for the kids that go to Margaret Murphy or go to Spurwink or whatnot. Just like we're responsible for 33% of the kids that we program for in-house. And then we get 33% from that goes from feds, and that is from the state.
So this is in addition to tuition. And so 47 and 48 is what the school is charging us to have the kids go there. And line 58, 59 is our portion of the cost to pay their main care seed.
Mhm.
And this is one of those items that I know sometimes I get questions like, well, how did the budget go from this to this in 10 years? Well, one of them is 10 years ago, we weren't responsible for any main care seed. It wasn't part of the formula. And now we are responsible for it. And that's what you're seeing in those massive numbers. And remember, Scott, I don't know if you remember, you might have been chair years ago when that came up. And the main care seed was a projection of significant millions of dollars that then became responsibility of the local municipality.
So this is a huge chunk of money, right? So, and not your fault, but this is something that has to be discussed. So when we have community members or counselors asking us specifically why this significant amount, and we're not talking just about, cost of living with all the staff and all those things. Like, how many students do we have in out of placement right now, and how many are on the waiting list? Those are the kind of things we need to know also.
135, I'd say, are outplaced right now, and we have a waiting list that is anywhere between 40 and 60.
So there's 135 students that are outplaced right now in Margaret Murphy or wherever the place
Spurwink
is.
suites are
Okay. And there's about, how much do you say, way on the waiting
anywhere
list?
from 40 to 60, but some of those will go into our own programs like RISE or our day treatment programs. It's all about spots.
And have we had a conversation with our legislators about getting this changed? Because how can local districts handle this kind of cost, especially when we're a city that's a service center and we're continuing to see more and more kids that need special education handle this cost? This is unreasonable.
Totally agree.
Mr. Beaupelon.
Yeah, is there a mean, median, or average amount that we can look at, how much it costs to place a student out of our district?
I'd say anywhere from 40 to 150 per year per student, not
40,
including transportation,
40,000 to 150,000.
depending on which placement it is.
Thank you.
Just
And my second part, if I may, Jake, I'm directing this to you. We had discussion several months ago that we would hopefully be able to explore alternatives to look at other districts in the area to kind of combine and save money. Did that prove impractical? Did they not return our calls, or where are we? Were we?
Mixed. And so one of the challenges we have in the most immediate sense is the special purpose private schools are also struggling to hire staff. And we have had them say, yeah, we'll take them, but not yet. We've also seen things like RETC. I don't know if you've seen it in the media, but that is our most local school. That is a regional school that takes some of our kids, and they are closing in this current budget cycle. And so not only have we not had the opportunity to expand the collaborative piece, decisions were made across the river to close that facility. And so we have a reduction in available slots there. I also want people to recognize these are the students that have the most severe level of need. And so you're talking about everything from nonverbal students who require significant support, who may be just fine, who also may require a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio because they're when they struggle to express themselves, they become incredibly violent. These are students who over a full process and referral process and IEP that even our educators have said the student is not safe around other children. The student is not safe to adults. And so when we're talking about the level of need everything ranging from severe disability to severe behaviors. This is that grouping of students. And then the costs continue to go up. And transportation is another significant driving cost factor for the students that go elsewhere. We have students that travel as far south as Scarborough, I believe, Saco area. Some that travel north, some go east, some go west, and there's a whole lot of specialized transportation that goes with that. That's not a big bus that's moving. That's a smaller vehicle that may have multiple staff on it.
Mr. Bopalon, you continue.
I agree with Member Scott that we've got to make this very clear to the public and to the city council when they're looking at our figures. It speaks for itself.
Ms. Bowden.
Thank you. So sorry to put you on the spot, but
That's okay.
some numbers aren't adding up for me, so I just need to clarify, and then I kind of have a statement on this. So you're saying that we have about 135 students that are outplaced,
Mhm.
and our budget for that in here is just under 2 million. And you're saying we have about 35 to 40 kids on a waiting list, 40 to 60,
Mhm.
and we need another million.
So the cost for the 135 or whatever is close to 10 million with transportation right now.
Okay.
Those numbers have come down since last year because we have added more programming in. But it's kind of been like this push and pull because we haven't been able to hire the amount of staff that we needed to fill them here. But then you have to pay on the other end and send them to the special purpose private school. I have, as of the last 2 or 3 months, we have been hiring a lot more VHPs and teachers since the new ed tech contract came out. So that's been a really good thing.
Good.
But budgeted for that extra million to be saved, knowing that some of the special purpose private schools were going up anywhere from $25 to $50 per day per student.
Okay, so there's a cost increase there. So in the only reason, like, I'm just trying to calculate this in my head. I mean, I teach at a private preschool, and I have students that are nonverbal, and I have students who are autistic, and they have been diagnosed and they're on waiting lists, and they're 35, 40 people deep, and they are not going to get the services that they need. They're not getting the one-on-one care that they need. So how can we predict that these students in our waiting list are going to get into special placements out of district next year? Can we not, Kelly, are you saying that all of the students on the waiting list are going to get in and that's what we're budgeting for? Or
It's all by case basis, and it's like on level of need, right? So the
Right.
most, when a position comes up, a lot of the kids right now, we with our outside partners, we're servicing them because we can't do the abbreviated days. So we're doing some at Rooted. We look at all different options for kids so that everybody is getting something. It's just not to the level that they necessarily need when they're on a wait list.
I was going to say, the students on the wait list, what do we do with them before they get into the outplacement that they need? What are we doing with those students?
It really depends
Okay.
on where they're coming from.
Mhm.
If it's a little kid, sometimes they're already in a special purpose private school and it's an easy transition. Some kids that are not being serviced because like Sandcastle and different places have wait lists and they can't get the staffing they need to service the one-to-ones.
Mhm.
So those kids are coming into kindergarten with less than they would have in the past. So they're not ready for school. So it's like a full-on team. We're all planning and programming 24/7 to get kids what we can.
Yeah.
It's a massive puzzle.
Yeah. And I mean, I hate to even be asking these questions because obviously these are the children that need the most from us. And I completely understand that. I just wonder if we're overestimating with that $1 million with the realistically, are we going to get them the out of district placement that they need? Is this something, we're looking at really hard cuts this year in every department. Is this something that could maybe be cut in half or we put aside $500,000? Is that full $1 million necessary for for the situation that we're in right now?
I
That's my
think
question.
I think you raise a good point. And so Director Crafts and I and the rest of us have talked about these numbers specifically. And I think that the question you're asking is the same one we asked. And I get that it might cost that, but if you can't place them, why budget for it? And so I think that I would have a fair amount of comfort with budgeting less in this area. But I'm also curious if the school committee would entertain a contingency type line in our budget, because if those spots do become available, we are absolutely obligated to provide it. And so I'd be willing to go back to the drawing board on this number if the committee would entertain contingency type language. To be honest, for anything, obviously it would have to come back before the committee, but I really think in a budget this tight, a contingency is a very responsible conversation. Even with fund balance, talking about a reserve. So for future years, we can talk about how it exists in the budget. It's an improved number, but it's available to the committee to make action on things without having to go through a referendum process. So if we're going to run this lean, I think we should have some things available, but it would allow us to budget maybe less there. Should it be needed, we can come back to you.
Let's do it.
Ms. Eames.
Thank you. Is there any hope for hiring in-house? Is there room for these
Yeah,
students who are on the wait list?
Yep.
If we should find the people, is there room? Are there rooms for them? Is there
There-
space? Equipment?
yeah. I mean, and like I said, the last couple months, the hiring has been up. It's
Yeah.
been good. And we do have this, like, for instance, at Connors, we started 5 new classrooms there this year for our rise, and we have an extra self-contained classroom. It's new though, so it's
Mhm.
it's still in its infancy, so
Yeah.
it's not up to full par where it will be, like, whereas Farwell right now has been up and running
Yeah.
functionally, and Geiger, and they're doing well.
Uh-huh.
It's just gonna take some time,
Okay.
and the
That-
staff shortage
That
hasn't
would
helped.
be more efficient and more cost effective if we could do it. So
Yes.
I would just
There-
urge us to
Yes.
put our eggs in that basket.
Yes.
Whenever we can.
Totally agree with,
Thank you.
for multiple reasons, budgetary being a big one, but also any kid from our community that we can keep in our community for their teaching and learning experience and integrated with the community itself is obviously better. We prefer.
Yeah,
that.
and I think last year too, with my budget proposal and that, that's what we're trying to do. It's just for the staffing shortages and, everything else. But I do feel like that's gonna get a lot better.
Ms. Hurd.
Thank you. I feel like this is a silly question, but I have to ask. Do we provide care for pre-K students? Because all of these are just K through 8, K through 8, K through 8. And I feel like that's a silly question, but do we provide special ed services for pre-K?
CDS does.
So what happens with our pre-K students that are currently getting CDS services that once they start kindergarten?
We will have a transition meeting and decide programming for them, whatever it may be. It may be in the mainstream, it may be, off to a special purpose private school. It's all individualized.
So kind of where I'm going is, have we budgeted, like, is that part of that, like,
Yeah, it's budgeted.
okay, so that's already
Yep.
in here of like what need potentially is needed. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. So a couple of things. So our last meeting, you gave us a piece of paper that had all of these extra notes with each article. I would really like to have that because I write all this down and I'd prefer to have the paper. So we talked about last time, the potential reductions, and there was a specific section there on special education, and it was several positions. It said
Mhm.
that was 90% of that is approximately of that is unfilled positions, right? Is that on top of what you said you've already started filling?
I still have some available positions. See, to get in the weeds too much, but when I came on board, it was more of a one-to-one.
Mhm.
The IEPs were being written that way. After reading the special ed audit that was conducted by Great American Consultants, and I really took a look into that and noticed that some of them could be served 2-to-1, 3-to-1. I started unraveling all those pieces and where the positions were in all of the different buildings. So I organized like who needs a one-to-one, and we went from there. So that's where there came some extra positions.
Okay. I'm seeing us having a hard time here. I mean, it. Yeah, I haven't been working at Sandcastle for a little bit now because my life and I have a lot of other stuff going on, but they're begging me to come back, like they're begging because this is a serious need everywhere. I don't know. This is really tough, and this is not on you at all. This is just really tough on a community to handle this kind of cost.
It's a balancing act because I'm like, do I take it, not cut the positions and not put it in the special purpose? So it's like a
So
either way.
if I may, I'd like to just reiterate what Director Crash just said. When we sat and talked about budget and the reductions that we shared with you last time, the crosshair, if you will, that she was looking at was we either, because I was looking hard, obviously, for reductions, we either reduce the positions or we leave some, or we leave them. And then the special purpose number maybe could be lower, but it's a thin line to play between the two. And so I don't have the exact number off the top of my head because we continue to look at lines and items, but there were numerous special ed positions that were reduced. And I don't know if Adam or Bill has a number roughly or Kirsten off the top of your
31,
head.
I think.
31 positions that are not in this budget. So you see the $1 million increase there. But the rough cost of 31 positions, again, in past years, you'd have both of those items. And so we're reducing that.
1.5 million. Mhm.
Mr. Beauclair.
Thank you. I'm sure this is a common problem all over. Do any of your peers have any bright lights or ideas or solutions or proposals?
So Karen can attest to this because she participates in the superintendent's meetings, as do I. There's actually a lot of new superintendents in the immediate area in Western Maine. And there's a whole lot of them asking, how are any of us going to do this? And in and around special ed and programming, especially, a lot of the smaller districts don't know how, and I don't know how we'll absorb this, but smaller districts is probably even more challenging to absorb the special purpose costs. And the rates that came out have been, I don't want to say baffling because I know where the rates are coming from. But when we get, something in the mail and Kirsten will either bring it down or I'll get it directly and we look at the changing rates, it's 15, 20%, 25%. It's some of the numbers are staggeringly high. And because there's no other place for students to go that can provide that level of need, we're kind of on the hook.
Kristen, just a question. Do we have physical plant available to expand your programming? Do we have more classroom space available that's underutilized currently?
We have, well, it's all being utilized. It's just not fully up to, not fully staffed. So once we get more BHPs in and teachers, we can let more kids into the programming. And what we've seen though over the last, since COVID happened, the behaviors are significant. They're more challenging than they were prior to. So it makes it even a little bit more challenging because always want to make sure that it's safe and that, it's staffed appropriately, but,
Ms. Scott?
Thank you. I have a couple more questions, please. So on the list you gave us tonight on the student enrollment, it says Lewiston LPS outplaced, and that says 118.
Mhm.
And so what's the difference there? Just to.
because when they are transitioning back in, which is always the goal, right?
Mhm.
So the middle school and high school, this happens to more. When they get added into a class period, like let's say at LHS, they'll come off the rolls on Power School for outplacement, but they're still outplaced because we're still paying the tuition.
But we're still paying.
Yeah.
Okay, that's important because that's 20 student or
Mhm, mhm.
I'm not math
Yeah.
person. So, yeah.
And
Okay.
just for context, and I remember, Scott, I know you have lived that world, but for others, just in case, that could be the student's doing all right, and we think that we're going to try it. So they come back to, say, the high school for one class a day or one class every 2 days. And if that goes all right, we grow it and we try to figure out the supports for transition and the goal again being fully to be back. So we go from one class to two classes or one day off and just make sure they have supports in transition. But that's as soon as they are scheduled at the high school, they become an enrollment. And that also pairs with, I mentioned this, I think last time, but we're still looking for 23 students from the state in our subsidy because those students were in grade 12 last year and itemized as grade 12. So by default, they go click and they roll over as not students, but 23 of them are students currently who are working on their diploma or credits for the diploma. So those charts are as of October 1 and they have some fluctuations. I think that's another key piece is the students that have identified or been outplaced this year would not be part of that October 1 count necessarily. So if they got placed October 2nd, you're not going to see it on that list.
Okay. Do we have a number of how many special ed students we have in our school right now that are not outplaced?
1,100 about.
1,100
Mhm.
of our total student enrollment?
Mhm.
Thank you. And then on the stipend for special ed and ELL was over 400,000. Roughly 2/3 of that is in Article 2. Can we get a little bit better explanation on what that is and where that is, please?
So in the contract negotiations, there was $3,000 that went to special educators in addition to their salary. And so that's. What was that for? It was just a negotiated amount with the expressed interest of trying to attract and retain our special educators. So it reads like a stipend, but it's part of the salary structure.
During negotiations, we recognized that those particular positions were the most difficult to try to attract and also the most difficult to try to retain. There was a lot of churn on it. She felt that by adding that additional monies, if you qualified, that would help with both attracting and retaining those people. It's a difficult job. I mean, thankfully, Sue Williams and Bill had the insight to really help us with that, and that hopefully that's working. If you're starting to attract some folks, maybe it is.
Yeah.
That was the goal.
Yeah, it has felt like it's better.
So I guess I would ask, and I mean, 100%, it's an extremely difficult job.
Mhm.
It's not a job you leave at the door when you go home.
Mhm.
It's not at all. I know. But if there's some in there being held for stipends for positions that we're not filling, is that a little bit that might also be available? And I'm just asking, we're looking at pennies this year. I hate to do that, but we're looking at pennies this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if a position for a teacher goes unfilled, then the associated salary and benefits that's what creates that fund balance. I think we can take a more analytical look at that. That note is just one that I knew I wanted to share out loud. And also just as a marker that ELL is in that note, but they land in Article 1. I just wanted to touch on that cost to make sure people were aware of it. But I do think we can take a closer look at both the tuition, that salary stipend line, and make sure that all matches up. Because again, we did make this binder prior to the $3.5 million of cuts. And so those are not reflected in here, but we can reflect them.
It seems.
City council meeting is next, no, 2 meetings from now, 1 week from now.
It's on the 20th, 1 week from now,
Yeah, one week
but
from
we have a
now.
meeting on Wednesday.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm just thinking if we can get an updated binder with the changes in it, is that what's gonna happen?
An updated binder is a big ask, but I think we can point out some things and find some more reductions. And the only reason I say that is that's line by line detail, thousands of lines and adjustments.
Maybe I don't mean the whole binder, but anyway, I was just hoping that our discussion plus the paperwork could be combined somehow for the city council meeting. Maybe not, but that was my hopes.
I mean, I think I can, as a group, we can come up with a good solid overview. But those are line by line entries in Munis that are really, and I don't want to rush it and get them wrong, because that's when we end up in the red.
Can I add something about main care? Because I was sitting down when it was brought up.
Please.
So yes, we started it right this summer as soon as we hired for it. We're fully billing for section 65 right now. And we're getting into section 28, working with Kipro, who does our billing, and EDMS. We didn't want to cause an audit, so we've been trying to do it slowly and methodically. And also knowing that our teachers are under stress too in our RISE programs, and section 28 has a little bit more, you have to put more time into it to actually bill. All of our service providers are actually billing now. Our psychologists that we contract with are helping us bill. Our speech and language, OT, PT, like it's all up and running. It's just going to take time for you to see the actual funds come in the school system.
Just for my own edification, could you
Mhm.
just touch on 28 and 65, what those are? I know that we had discussions with the ed techs during our negotiations about the massive amount of paperwork that they were having to
Yep.
do. Is that in those sections?
Yeah, well, section 65 is for primarily students that are emotionally disturbed. That's our day treatment. For that one, you have to bill every hour. Put in your input. Section 28 is for FLS, RISE programs. And it's more intensive in that it's like every 15-minute increments. You probably know more than I do, but it's more of a taking on. So that's primarily the difference between them.
So not only would I would work one-on-one with a student, I would fill a notebook while I'm working with that student in the classroom, taking notes. And then it could take me up to 2 hours sometimes at the end of the day for just a morning class. This is not a full day. This is 2 hours of doing paperwork, writing down everything that we went through, how their reaction, every detail on everything, because some of these students, that's the work that's required to get them in the different classrooms. So we're talking specifically how they're holding a spoon. Can they put a spoon to their mouth? Can they, you know what I mean? I mean, we're talking details. So that's why it takes so much time and so much work to fill those requirements for that paperwork.
The IEPs also need to be written appropriately.
Right.
So the case managers need to make sure that the goals and everything and the behavior plans are for the billing purposes. So if not, they get kicked back to us.
And we're not talking students like, you know, when you are talking students that are 8 years old that still can't hold the spoon without having a problem. And this is not necessarily a physical handicap. Sometimes it's an autistic diagnosis where they can't handle the spoon because it's the sensory issues with their hands. I mean, it is extreme in some cases with some of these children, and they're nonverbal on top of that. And think about how frustrated you get sometimes just with the littlest thing. They can't express themselves when they can't do these things. And I know that they want to do these things. You can see them trying, and then that entails another whole situation that has to be handled. So it's quite extensive.
And back along, we hadn't really been doing the billing appropriately. Is that what we found?
Not in a consistent manner, I guess you could say. I know that prior to me being an assistant principal, I'm a special ed supervisor. At that time, we were exploring doing 28 and the iPads were bought to do that, but it never got off the ground. And so when I came on board last year and read the audit report and met with, them when we came up here, I'm like, why aren't we doing this? And really started to dig into it. So section 65, we were doing it in little pieces last year, but didn't have a consistent person doing it. Because it is a massive, everything has to be done in a certain way, and
Well, kudos to you for getting it underway, Kristen. That's really.
There's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a lot of work, but keep it up.
We actually have a main care billing specialist. She's not here tonight, but her name's Jen Ross, and she's doing a great job. So she deserves a lot of it. Yes.
I would say she probably needs to be recognized for her work, for sure.
I want to say, since Kirsten's at the podium, the amount of work that has been done, and I think the general sentiment in our community and in our school culture about how things are going with special education are markedly improved from what they used to be. And that's attributed to you and your work with your team. So thank you so much for all the work you're doing.
Thanks. Yes. Thank you all for being so supportive, actually. So, I mean, it's been great. Yes.
I just want to add one brief clarification so there's no misunderstanding on the report.
Really?
Sorry, excuse me. You had a great question about what is that other line and why does it have the exact same description? So I'm going to fix that. I don't know why those have the same description in the system, but that second set of numbers should say seed, not tuition. But the thing that I want to point out and make sure there's no misunderstanding on is if you looked at that line, lines 58 and 59, it could look like those expenditures only go back 1 year for the seed. That is not the case. That was a coding correction. If you look down to line 69 and look back a couple of years, there it is right there. And you'll see that that went down massively. I don't want there to be any confusion or misunderstanding that this is a brand new cost in the last 2 years. It goes back probably almost 10 years at this point. So it was new then, but we've been living with it, unfortunately, for almost 10 years now. It is all there and accounted for, just in a different line. So I apologize for the confusion on that heading, and I'll get that fixed for the next go around so it's less confusing. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, Ms. Bowden. Yes, there's been a request for a 5-minute break, so we'll be in recess for 5 minutes. Mr. Bopalon.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm a beat and a half behind, and I don't know where this goes, but last meeting, I was really concerned about what I perceive as an overload for our guidance staff at the high school, I'm sure at the middle school as well. And I was somewhat curious as to the role of the community liaison for the next step position. I'd like to go on record as thanking Director Johnson for the very thorough and invaluable stuff that's done there. It's very thorough. It's appreciated. I still think it's a travesty, the student counselor ratio. But as we said when we started this, I haven't found any place we can cut to add to it. But I'd like us all to keep that on the horizon, that 1 to 340, I believe, I don't have my figure in front of us, is not okay. But thank you again for having Director Johnson clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I changed slides to Article 3 just to show some highlights. Again, you have teacher salaries and benefit changes. There's also new positions for satellite programming that will be at Edward Little that will benefit our entire region. There are some ESER supplies that are being plugged back in, and some cost of materials. So in the trades world, if you will, you think about building a house or fixing your automobile, or parts or wood or metal. All of those things are up pretty significantly. And that's their classroom supply. And so there's an increase in cost there. But I also want to make a note that in the ED 279, and I know we've talked about this a lot, and I've talked about the $430,000 that I think can deceive people on the bottom line with how much Lewiston Public Schools lost in subsidy. It is an actual plus to our students in the region that LRTC, their subsidy is up $430,000, and much of that is in part due to additional programming and cost. And so you'll see some increase in your budget, but there's also an increase in subsidy. And so what you see locally for an increase is really around more supplies, some contractual things, but large in part, any of the additional pieces are either still in ESER or in that additional $430,000, the subsidy. And I'm sure Director Callahan's also here. He may answer any questions that you may have. Article 3 starts at the very bottom of page 3 and then flips over to page 4. But the additional supplies and equipment, Adam helped me generate a number as we extrapolated that, is $148,000 in additional supplies and equipment for the technical center.
Ms. Bowden.
Thank you. You might have already answered this. I wasn't here when you started this on Wednesday. The $430,000 is the new programming in Auburn that's in the budget is. Oh,
So the $430,000 is additional state revenue specifically for CTE programming.
okay. So when I'm looking at the budget line 101, 104, 106, 108, 114, all Auburn, and new costs associated with starting our technical center in the new building. Is Auburn sharing any of this cost, or do we have to cover all of it?
So the way that subsidy formulation will work is that it will cover much of it. But as a regional technical center, we do own some of those costs. There have been conversations that have been ongoing about as things cycle through this new building space, what will be the associated cost with it and how will the region pay for it?
All right, it just seems to me, I mean, I understand that it's our program and that it's our director that runs this program, but it's their building and their space. And it just would seem appropriate that they would at least go halves with us on these costs to start up. Is that like an inappropriate thing to suggest or to ask?
So I really think it's a regional cost. So not just Auburn per se, but all 6 of the schools that participate. And I do think that there's a bigger context too, in that we have some things like custodial and IT and things like that we have included in our budget that are offset by subsidy. And so the trickier thing I think with CTE is how much of the programming is offset by state funding. And so while we have the budget piece here, the revenue that comes in covers much of what the budget includes. We do also provide some programming for Lewiston only kids, like in the afternoons at times, and those spaces can be used for other things. So we do have local usage and local cost. So it's not exclusively CTE, but much of the CTE is covered. So the numbers that you see here, all but I think 200,000 roughly is all subsidy covered. And so when the inverse to that is we think about the local benefit to Lewiston that is different from others, where we get 8 seats in all of those respective classes for the most part. Other districts get 4 or 2 or 1 as they build up to 16. And so there's a cost benefit to us. I don't want to get lost in the weeds on it, but much of it is subsidized and the money comes into us through a revenue.
Thank you.
Mr. Beaupont.
Okay, here we go again. Could I have an explanation for line 83 LRTC guidance?
Yeah, sure. So there's a student services staff at LRTC that helps students with co-ops, job placements, post technical center aspirations from apprenticeships and further programming, college, different assessments that are done for industry. They help facilitate and coordinate those. And there's one person that does that work. And what you're seeing there for an increase is around salary and also as part of the office. So that's not just one person's salary, it's part of an office cost for guidance as a whole.
And these services are provided to all district students.
So he is available to all technical center students. And Rob, I don't know if you can give me a shout of what that enrollment looks like today as far as a region.
So at the moment, the tech center's total enrollment is just under 800. So we have about a 1 to 800. That's a one staff member that provides those services in the guidance area, in the student services area.
800 different students.
Yes.
Does Lewiston get credit for every single one of them? So that we get the state reimbursement because they're our kids?
I do think there's overlap. So students who are at the technical center also have respective school counselors tied to their schools in the region. So there's some overlap. So while this individual does a lot of work and it's definitely a full-time job, I think if students are having problems with their schedule or things like that at their home school, they would see their homeschool counselor for that kind of conversation. I don't know if that helps. There's just an overlap.
No, I mean, when we're looking at the total number of students, are all of the CTE students within LRTC credited to our total count for reimbursement from the state, or do they lie more with their homeschool?
Yeah, so the subsidy around that is based on the student enrollments in the region. So yes, we do get that subsidy in general from a student perspective. So that's part of that overall revenue you see in our on the revenue sheet that's specific to CTE up towards the top.
Is there a fee assessed to out of Lewiston students that take advantage of LRTC programs?
No, so there's no charge to Lewiston for students to attend programming at LRTC. There could be some new challenges that Director Callahan's already working on when we have the satellite programming. That could include now our students that want to attend those programming opportunities have to have transportation over there. Again, Director Callahan's already working on that. There are other things too where we absorb some of the custodial and IT related things because of how the high school also uses it. We don't know how Auburn's going to feel about that once the school is up and running. So that's going to bear a larger conversation. Things that we have to consider. For example, we could one day wake up and see an invoice from Auburn to say that the regional programming is using this space and we are cleaning it. So here's your bill. In which case, we've already started the conversation as a region to say, these are regional costs.
Do we, for example, the students that Turner area Levitt sends to Lewiston, do they pay for the transportation costs of the school bus back and forth?
Yes, they do. So the regional partners provide their own transportation.
I see lines 103 and 104 culinary arts, which we're very proud of here, and the culinary program that's going to be started in Auburn. I realize it's pennies on this budget, so forgive me, but is there replication? Why is there a need for two programs?
So one of the issues that we face in our recruitment of new students every year is the fact that we have some programs, and the Green Ladle is certainly a great example of that, where although we can enroll 30 new students in a given year, we're usually seeing somewhere between 70 and 90 applications for that program. So it's really to try to accommodate the demand that we're seeing and what we know the community is asking of us. You know, as fast as we can turn students out of the Green Ladle, they're being spoken to by local area businesses to employ them.
It's more than just flunking a teacher and staff in a new program like this. Are the supplies being paid for out of this amount here? The stoves, the pots and pans, the stuff needed?
So we have purchased a fair bit of that through a current federal grant that we have, the Carl Perkins grant, in terms of equipment. Some of the new equipment that went in, like stoves and walk-in refrigerators and things like that, came with the new building costs that were associated. So that was absorbed through the state as the folks in Auburn were building that out. Mostly what we're looking at here in this is the what we'd call instructional supplies, which are really groceries. So that's mostly what I think you're looking at.
Thank you. So I guess my brain was thinking along the same lines as Member Bowden. Because I was looking at those costs too. And specifically, when I go back to line 87, it says LRTC operation of buildings, and it's actually down 16,000. Why is it down 16,000? Are we taking from us, not fulfilling what we need for the building, or it's custodial? Am I reading that wrong? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't have my ruler with me tonight. You see what happens? Okay. All right.
But just
But
because
still custodial.
I like to
down.
point out a reduction whenever we can.
Yeah.
So, but really that custodial cost, and Josh can give me a yay or nay because he's right behind Rob. That custodial reduction is really based on salary. So we had someone retire and someone come in, and there's less costs connected to that. Am I accurate in that, Josh? And a change in benefits or yeah.
Ms. Bowden?
I have a question regarding, I guess it's not really about a budget line, but you talked about culinary arts and the demand and how high that is, which is why you replicated it in Auburn. I know there's other programs, like I know electrical is super popular, and you probably see the same thing. So it just a general question, like how did you determine what you were opening in Auburn? And why wasn't a second electrical one of them? Because that is one of the things that I hear on repeaters. That's what kids want to get into, and it's a very tough program to get into.
That's a great question. So the state has a formula. All of the programming that we do at LRTC has to be approved by the state. That when we want to begin programs, no matter what it is, there are really three things that they look at. The first is the student demand. So we went out when we were preparing our our program application, and we surveyed students in all of the 6 areas schools that we serve. And we looked at what they were asking of us. And again, they were things like cosmetology that we didn't currently offer, but then there were also things like culinary and electrical that we currently offer, but we just don't have the capacity to satisfy the demand. We also have a local area advisory that constitutes of local employers. So we met and we meet with them regularly to hear about the kinds of trends that we see in employment, and also the things that they anticipate in the next couple of years. So again, that's another piece of data. And then we're asked to look at statewide and regional data around high wage, high demand, high growth areas. So what you're asking is a great question. And if I had a magic wand, electrical would be on that list. And that's not to say that it won't be. But for the moment, the raft of programs that we started there were things largely that we didn't currently offer. So cosmetology, firefighting, EMT, biotechnology are all things that we're going to be offering to students that we don't currently. However, culinary and education were two that we're replicating just based on the demand. But I would also say that our areas in the trades, plumbing and electrical, particularly in welding probably, are things that we'll be looking very closely at, talking to our advisory about in terms of perhaps building those out even further.
Anyone else with questions for Director Callahan? Thank you, Rob.
So next up, we have Article 6, which is System Administration. And that starts on very bottom of page 8. Yeah, and actually, much of the cost in line 207 under school committee is around legal and insurance. And as a note that there was a small increase last year in the school committee stipend. I emphasize the word small, but you all are underpaid. Actually, you don't really get paid at all. And with inflation, it's even less. Sorry. And so if we scroll down on the top of page 9, you see line 208, and then you see increases there, and in that you have Karen, Bill, myself, Cheryl, supplies, and then anything we do through my office. Also have human resources, and I did have a note, actually a positive on the office superintendent. I'm going backwards here for a second. Adam did find some duplications, so there'll actually be a $20,000 roughly reduction to that line in some of those duplicates that will be removed. HR overall, that they're fully staffed now, and that increase in cost is around salaries, benefits, and being fully staffed. Fiscal services, and that's really around Adam's office, and that increases benefits and insurance. Salary benefits. And that's the sum of Article 6 for system administration.
Questions? Comments? Seeing none, we'll move on.
So Article 8 is at the bottom of page 9, and pretty straightforward. We have a shift in contracts, salary benefits. That's the only change there. Just as a reminder, though, as it relates to transportation, we did maintain the full cost of transportation underneath the umbrella of hoping that all of our transportation will run. When it does not, we do not get invoiced, so we don't pay for that. So this year, there's been some savings there, but things are trending in the positive, not just with transportation, but their staffing and the number of people that we're hopeful to get their licensure to drive. And just as a little tiny plug, we're not fully there yet, but for those of you who are asking questions about the start and stop times of schools, the team's worked hard on that, and I think it's looking good, like it's going to go back to what it used to be, maybe even with some light adjustments for dismissal time being, I think, in a better range for our community as a whole. Any questions on Article 8? Yes, sure.
Where are we in our current contract? Like how long do we have left in our current contract with Hudson? Like where are we? Do we know?
We're either in year 2 or 3 of a 4-year contract, I believe. But I can find out for you. I don't think it's year 2, but a little piece of me, we'll get you the exact and get back to you. And Article 9, the title is on the bottom of page 9, but really it starts up on page 10. So there's some salary increases and benefits, building-based projects. One line that really stands out, if you look at line 241, which says the operation of building Dingley. So this is where your district cost things land. That's the spot where it gets invoiced. So one big thing is, for example, like liability insurance was actually up $24,000, which makes up a big portion, obviously, of what you see there for growth. But there's other things that you might see that are district related costs, yeah, out and about, but they land under the Dingley building as a district related cost. That piece there.
Ms. Bowden.
Thank you. So I'm glad you brought that up because I had that marked. I also have line 250 marked. The custodial for Dingley is going up 40.2%. And I can't see it. I don't understand because it's not a student building and I'm not sure why we're going up 40% on custodial in the main office. So could you explain that?
We should be able to explain it. It looks like the team is referencing currently. So we'll come back to you with that. Other questions in around 9? Yeah.
Ms. Hurd.
Thank you. So I want to preface before I say this that this is my statement or comments are by no means towards any certain person or persons in general. It's just a general observation. Excuse me. So last meeting I asked if we were had any contracts for local facilities, office supplies, that kind of stuff. Excuse me. And I did send an email and I did get some good information back. And I wanted to simply share with the public that currently we have not done a deep dive into our Jansan office in quite some time. And so it's a little concerning to me that you came to us with a list of a whole page of 2 categories of cuts that we were making, but not once did us as a team or LPS as a team ever think like maybe we should look into doing a deep dive of these things. Like, where are we at looking here? I think I would much rather be cutting gel pens and ballpoint pens and blue and black ink than cutting a teacher position. So I would really like, and Bill has already spoken to this, that we would do a deep dive and see where we can get there to see where we could find some cost savings, I think, because I think we've kind of gotten complacent. We have, go ahead.
Is there any way I can chime in? So I just want to just be upfront. The turnaround for the reduction, knowing that we're looking at $7.8 million was a turnaround. Our facilities director didn't have enough time to get down to that level of nitty gritty like we had done a deep dive with like the special ed staffing and things like that. So I don't want to come across like there's no reductions there. There was some. Certainly, I think there's more to save, but I also want to be upfront in saying that when we went from that Monday to Wednesday, I had looked so hard at staff and knowing that we have a almost $8 million shortfall. So I do think, and I think Josh is here, he would speak to this, that if he had the time before Wednesday to make further reductions, he certainly would have, but we did touch on it. We know we can give things another look, but really the bulk up front was focused on where we're at with vacancies. That's really where we started doing the bulk of our work and what we can live without. So having said that, I don't think that there's millions of dollars in facilities, at least from my perspective, but we can give it a deeper look. I don't want to come across like facilities offered up nothing, because they did offer some things, and Josh has mentioned that there's probably some additional things he could reduce. We just haven't taken that yet, timing wise.
So just to finish kind of my train of thought is, and I don't think that facilities hasn't done anything. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying there's millions of dollars to be saved in facilities, but I'm saying if we can save $50,000, that's a teacher position. That's a body that we can put back in our building. And I know not everybody thinks like this, but we're in the business of educating students. So as a business, we need to look at every penny, every dollar, every cent that we can save. And if that means we have one toilet paper across the board, one paper towel across the board, we offer one blue pen, one black pen, we offer one type of hand soap. It's probably going to ruffle some feathers, and you're going to have some people that say like, well, I don't like that blue pen, or I want a gel pen, or I want 3-ply toilet paper, or whatever. And we have maybe some facility staff that they're working more of a relationship. So they've been working with Hilliard for the past 10 years, and they like their delivery driver, and their delivery driver comes in and they go through their stock and they tell them what they need. And that's all great. But if it can save us $50,000 or $30,000, I think that it's worth taking the time to, do that. And it also doesn't account for the time that each person is sitting online looking for a certain product, like scrolling Amazon or scrolling Walmart or scrolling Staples or scrolling WB to look for a certain product. Like that's time out of their day that they're taking to scroll for that and to cut the check and put the stamp and put it in the mail. And like, those are all things that we don't logically think about in our brain, but are still there. So I think we're doing good, but like Member Scott has said before, we're at pennies here. So any way that we can cut anything, I think we need to try and put in 110% if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Hurd makes some good points. Is there a certain dollar amount that we are required to bid on? A certain, if we need papers or something like that?
I believe the purchasing policy sets a bottom limit of 25. Single purchase item is it has to exceed 25,000 to be bid at this point of the purchasing policy.
So we know that despite being in the technological age, we still use a lot of copy of paper. Do we bid on that for the year, or is it by the month, or is it by the need?
So that is a bid process, and we also collaborate with local partners to increase the bulk of that purchase to save the district money.
Mr. Hanson.
Looks like Adam may have some.
So specifically on the paper, this year we were able to join the state bid pricing and get our paper from WB Mason as part of the state bid. So that's usually the best route for us to take. We can bid it out on our own, but usually joining the state bid is going to get us the best price. And that is the most costly single item of supplies. So we do look for savings there anywhere we can. And we are looking to stock up on paper before that price runs out. So.
I know for a number of years, I don't know how successful it's been, St. Mary's and CMMC at least thought about bidding together. Is there any collegiality specific to Auburn that a bid process would help with?
That's definitely something that we could look at. We actually have the Great Falls Service Center, which we do the food bid and the milk bid with that. And then we also buy some software with that. And about a month ago, I was elected as the executive director of that. So I would love to add that to the sheet, but that's definitely something that we can do. But with the paper in particular, the state bid was kind of the way to go as far as watching paper prices. Oh yeah, with the city, we combine looking at fuel and things like that. Yep. I did want to go back to that position, the Dingley. Yeah, so that was a position that had been vacant for a while, and we did hire. So there's a couple positions in there, and one of the positions took full benefits. So it was a huge part of that was benefits.
So can I ask, not to be like super nitty gritty, but I mean, that's where we're at with this budget. How necessary is it to have a full-time custodian at the Dingley building?
So let me just clarify what I was saying too, in the sense that that is not just the Dingley building, that includes in there a maintenance position.
Mhm.
Okay, so that would be district, it's the sundry position for that. We have been working with, because when the person at Dingley retired, we couldn't fill the position for custodial. So we worked with Allstate, cleaning to have somebody come in and clean the building. And we're seeing that it's close to a full-time position, but it's much more reliable, and we only have the person when we need the person in there cleaning. So, I mean, you're asking a valid question.
Yeah, no, I'm
So
just,
we're finding that we're able to clean it in a lot less hours, or use cleaning in a lot less hours.
I guess I'm just sort of picturing a custodian there. I mean, every time I've been in the Dingley building, I've seen a custodian working, at night, and
And they come in around that time, like around 4 o'clock is when they come in.
yeah. And so is that every day? Do we have one in there every day, full time,
5 nights a week.
5 nights a week? And is this custodian solely at Dingley? And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to like single out anybody. I'm
Yeah.
just asking questions here.
The way
We
we've
have
been doing in the past year, it's been a contracted service, so that person
one
just comes
custodian.
in. Yep.
Is it something that could be rotated? Are there other custodial openings in our district and other buildings?
So we were actually, at one point, we were doing that as we were trying to fill the position, and then we tried just to see like, what would it be like if we used Allstate to do a cleaning service. And so it's gone good the past few months, so.
Okay, I'm just trying to come up with ideas here, like if we had an opening, if we kind of moved someone into a floating position between schools, so they could stay employed full-time, but not necessarily be at Dingley.
And that might be an option, but where we're not fully staffed in our buildings right now, we're
Yeah.
already short. So then when we were doing that, I mean, we were really kind of putting pressure on a school because they were losing somebody and they were already down a position as well. So
Okay.
that's a little bit of the crunch that we have.
Yep. All right, I'm just thinking out loud. I'm sorry.
Ms. Whitlow.
Yeah, I just want to point out back in 2019 and 20, it was 116,000 was the cost for the custodial at Dingley. And then 2021, 21, 22, COVID hit. And so obviously decreased it. And so we're kind of getting back up to the average, the normal costs, I think personally. Plus, we have a lot more people and staff, administration in that building than we ever had before. So I'm sure they have their hands full, whoever's cleaning there. I feel it's justified, but I just thought I wanted to throw that out there.
Mr. Bopala.
Thank you, Director Grant. Get up back at the podium, direct a question to you if I may. Other than, of course, school buses, but specific to Article 9, do we have any other contract services? And if so, is it due to worker unavailability or monetary concerns, saving money?
So we do have other contracted services as far as like our general maintenance goes. As far as unworker not being able to fill, the only one that we had was the Dingley position, that custodial position that we couldn't fill. But we also do have the CBA, so we have to be cautious when we're bringing in. It's kind of like a tiered approach as far as who we can bring in for subcontractors to do work. So as far as Article 9 goes, are there other?
We contract all kinds of things like plowing.
Right.
Fire detection, maintenance, fire extinguisher maintenance, service, things of that nature. Yeah, roofing repairs and maintenance service.
Right. So general building maintenance, we're using different contractors to take care of those projects.
That's certainly understandable because of, again, areas of expertise and the maintenance that has to be done. I'm just concerned that if it's been my observation, if not experience, that people that work under contract don't have the loyalty, the onus of their situation. And I just see that in other areas where, again, there's been staffing shortages and there's been need to contract for maintenance. The quality of the work may not be as good and everything else. So I just want to make sure that we're not being penny wise and pound foolish, although again, the budget is certainly important here.
Yeah, so I guess to give you a tangible example is we have a district electrician. Dan Bossy is who you met, had retired from that position. And it was vacant for a while we were looking to fill it, and we were getting concerned that we weren't going to be able to fill it. So we did work with some of our contractors to say, hey, look, we might have electrical work. Can we call you and do it? And there was some kind of inconvenience with it, because it would be like, yeah, but call me when you have 5 or 6 things so that we can plan for a whole day to come over and take care of these things. And then when you do that, you might disrupt a classroom, because it's like, hey, we can get that outlet fixed right now. I understand you have a class in here, but we've got to figure that out. So we have hired. So I think after living that is why the district went with a electrician. I can remember when that position was put into the budget, and kind of having lived that, we do have an electrician. And now that we have an electrician, there's been, a bunch of projects in the short, he hasn't even been with us in a month, but has come forth and taken care of a lot of projects that are there, and becoming intimate with the buildings, and making suggestions on what we might do for, future projects.
And I think you've just justified my concern of hiring within whenever possible. And if it costs more, it's not significant. I think it's going to pay off in the end by not trying to make a buck for another company and having some responsibility. Thank you.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. So I'm gonna go back to the custodial. And I'm looking at the custodial at Montello. That looks like do we lose somebody there? And then the custodial at the high school, that's a pretty significant increase, 186,000. So if we could talk about that, though, just those 2 lines.
So I know at the high school that custodial includes maintenance and upkeep. So there's some projects in there.
Okay.
Those projects were actually part of some of the cuts that Superintendent Langless brought forth. So that line we could probably see is going to be reduced.
Okay.
And I also believe, what number was the Montello?
245.
Yeah, I think some of that is employee costs, but again, those projects. And so as we look down through these lines, the ones that say custodial, those include maintenance and upkeep. And that is where we would put in projects. Like if we were going to get a new rug for this room and it wasn't going to be an LCIP project, we would put it in that line and it would happen through there. So some of the proposed cuts that were brought forth were from those lines.
Thank you. Just for clarification, lines 260, 261, and 260, 261, 262. Building maintenance district. I'm guessing that line item covers 252 to 259. Because all of those school lines are empty, right? From 2020 to now.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering why, if it says building maintenance district, LHS gets their own line. Yeah, and I'm sure, I'm just asking as just like a clarification, trying to understand why the rest of the schools are lumped into the district, which I'm assuming, and then LHS has their own line.
I think the building district line is mainly our district maintenance positions. Those are employees.
So that wouldn't be building maintenance of the rest of the schools? That those building maintenance falls under a different either operation of building or.
Yeah.
They can look real quick and let us know what those are.
Thank you.
Or
I'm
we
just
can
trying to
back-
find where all the building maintenance belongs.
Yeah.
Operation of building, yeah, at the very top, starting on line 233. But why do we have LHS?
And then why is there a building maintenance K through 6, line 251?
Let me look specifically what are in those lines, because I know it's making sense, but I want to see what's in them because building maintenance K6, and then the way that it's labeled, building maintenance LHS, that could be building maintenance 912. So it looks like, or excuse me, it's probably
I
712.
Okay.
if we need to break out that detail to bring it back, yeah, I'd rather be accurate than.
Anything else on Article 9?
Article 10, change the slide is, let's see here, starts at the top of page 12, or sorry, middle, the first section, page 12. And this is all debt service, so any projects that we have done, we have all that major capital, and you can see that our amount change in debt service is down significantly. From my perspective, I think we've done a good job not having massive projects that cost us too many dollars in addition to some other things. So debt service being down is just things being paid off. So that's a good, healthy
Good
approach.
I know it talks about major capital debt service, the 285,670. I'm assuming that some of that may be Connors, some of that might be the middle school, and some of it would be the high school edition. It'd be nice if we could at least identify what those major projects were.
Yeah, we absolutely can.
Sorry, which line are you looking up?
I'm sorry.
285,
In
Adam.
like 285, 86, 87, and 89, 90, 91. It just says major capital debt, but we don't know which building. I'm assuming that it's Connors, LHS, and LMS, but being the more recent projects. But if you could identify them for us, so we had some sense of which buildings those were, it might be helpful. You can have 5.
I was gonna say, I could share some of that from detail if you.
So line 285, which is the smallest amount, that would be Farwell. Line 286, that's your Connors, which is the biggest amount. And line 287 is Geiger. And so sort of like with the seed last year, I did some reorganizing of the accounts. We were sort of unnecessarily breaking out minor projects over all the schools. We don't have to do that. So I sort of merged it all into one line. But I wanted to give those 3 very large projects, those large state funded projects, their own lines. So that's what you're seeing there.
So I assume that 291 is the high school edition.
Yeah, let me look. Let me just confirm that. No, those 3 lines are the local counterparts of the 3 state projects above. Farwell, Geiger, and Connors.
So where's the high school edition? It's only about $1 million.
I promise you it's in there.
It was voter approved, but I think it's close to $1 million a year.
Might be. I believe it's in Article 9, line 280, but just give me a minute to confirm that. Some debt goes in Article 9 and some goes in Article 10. Yeah, this notebook isn't going to give me what I need. I'll have to drill in. So keep going with other things and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I just didn't want that to be just managed to be overlooked because we know it's real. I would have thought too that LMS edition might have been in there as well. It's a major project.
So just, and I know Adam's gonna look at that detail, but if you look at the lines 272 in Article 9, down toward the bottom, that's all debt service and capital. See, yeah, and so that, I think that's the line that he consolidated.
That 280 is the one.
Yeah. Guess the question is line 280 a consolidation of other lines? It may be the high school and others. But it's in the detail, so it's in the budget. I guess I can say that. May not be categorically there.
251 and 260, right? That's the ones we were asking about, the maintenance.
Yes,
That's the K6 is our plowing, everything except for the high school. And then there's another amount in there, about $5,000, which would be vehicle maintenance. And then the other one for the high school is all of the high school plowing.
Bill, would that high school one include the middle school to be like a 7-12 approach, you think? No, Josh? Yeah, plowing, we do a bingo.
Yeah, line 177 on page 7, improve. Improve. I thought it said infrastructure. Never mind. It's like,
Thank you. Plowing our contracts, is that by the storm? Is that a general? Is that a yearly contract? Are we locked in for 5 years? Like, tell me all about the snow.
I got everything you need to know about the snow. So we bid out our snow plow contract. We're in year 2 of a 3-year bid award. We awarded that to, I want to say, 4 different contractors. So that way our eggs are not in one basket. So if they go down, we don't lose every school. We only lose the schools that they're responsible for. So It is done, it's billed by the vehicle being used. So whether that's a bucket loader, a big plow, a small truck, a Bobcat with a snow blower on it, each one of those items has a specific hourly rate, and we are billed only the time that they are on site. So that's, and it's by storm. So depending on how the storms come in, we'll get a couple of weeks worth of invoicing if we've had storms. We also, on really big storms, we will pay them to come in and remove snowbanks because parking is at a premium. So we do that. As we get melting and refreezing, we pay them to come in and do salt and sand as needed as well. So it's kind of on call as needed for the non-major snow events. The major snow events, they show up that we have specific requirements by school and contractor as to what time they're supposed to have each school ready for staff and students to be on site. That's impacted by whether the school district is open or not that day, things of that nature. So we kind of ease the requirements. If we know school's not canceled, we just maintain a fire lane for emergency vehicle access only. If we're going to have school and students and staff are showing up, they have that school ready by 6 o'clock. If the storm continues into the morning, they come back later to tidy up, and or our custodial staff will go out and shovel and snow blow what needs to be done in the proximity of the building.
Thank you. So Jake has received a few texts or phone calls from me about moving dirt from the city and cannot access walkways, that kind of thing. I don't know if it's possible to maybe check in with the local principals or admin team at each school, and then at the end kind of give you some feedback on what worked and what maybe didn't work for our snow season. I mean, we can potentially be in quite a long season from potentially October to April, which is never great, but that's less times that I have to text Jake, or less. He's going to eventually just give me your number, and then you're going to get phone calls from me. But, just kind of like a roundup. And I know we're in year 2 and there's lots of stuff going on and lots of moving parts, but any way that we can make that easier, because I know it's tricky with buses, it's tricky with walkers, it's tricky with drop-offs, it's tricky with all of those things. So
I can say kind of generally that our administrators are not afraid to share their thoughts if there's something they think we can do better. And I'm always asking that question as well.
Right, and we have had some things, excuse me, come up this year, especially around ice and whether or not surfaces were actually taken care of the way they should have been. And Josh has been pretty responsive with our contractors to tell them what was not acceptable and what his expectations were. And so far this year, those things that we've had to address have not reoccurred. But I think there's sometimes a memory lapse, or part of what happened this year is you had same contractor, different plow individual who didn't know, oh, I was supposed to make a pass at that too. And so Josh is pretty responsive of correcting those things. I know one storm we got ice, and there was a lot of rumors flying about, well, we can't use that walkway because it's a slip hazard and we need sand. Well, the sand comes from the city, so we're waiting for the city. And like all of these different rumors that were out there, they were actually not all that factual. And Josh had it fixed by the end of the day.
Okay, I apologize. Bruce had it right the first time. It is line 291. That is the LHS debt. Sorry about that.
My guess, not having been around all that long, but my guess is that one of them is the addition at the middle school, because that was locally funded.
125 is Farwell. They gotta add up.
Yep. Right, and okay, so 291 is the addition at the high school. Great. And then yeah, I think that the only other ones that I would have, Josh, maybe I know we did the addition at middle school. That's probably 289. And then I was trying to think what we've done subsequent.
Got him. So that 289 was Farwell. And so 290 might be something middle school.
If we're still paying on the loan for Geiger, it would make sense that Farwell would have one as well as the Farwell addition. Because that was done not concurrent, that was added after the fact. So there might be two
That's
far
true. That's true. That was
The new fifth, sixth
the
wing
new-
was added after the fact.
right. So then the middle school might be the other one.
McMahon, so that would be the new gym and fifth, sixth wing at McMahon
Oh.
as well.
Okay. So we've paid off LMS? Well, no, I just, no, I mean, that was a $9 million project. That may be back in the other item, but okay. Okay. Just helpful to know that we didn't miss something. Major. I come back and tell Jake he missed that and he's got to find another mill. He's gonna kill me. Anything else on debt?
As long as we play the lottery tonight.
On debt service. Okay,
So adult education is the next one that we have for you tonight. And so that's actually under a different tab, in tab 9. And so you'll see some pluses and minuses there. Adult Ed's budget this year is not going to have an impact on the local tax rate. Director Tyner has worked with teacher increases and benefit, staff and benefit cost increases, and use of adult ed fund balance, which is separate of kind of the LPS umbrella fund balance. They have their own funding stream. They have their own funding through like ED 279 that exists for them. And so Jen's here, and Jen, I don't know if you want to add anything, but for the most part, they're staying flat as far as an impact locally. They're also doing a lot of really, really good work around applying for and receiving grants, apprenticeships, our new Mainers work. They're helping us with this teacher apprenticeship work. It's becoming a registered site. So lots of kudos to Jen and her team, doing a lot of really good work and finding ways to do so without impacting the local budget. And we'll share more Wednesday night about just detail. But Jen, if you want to add anything, please feel free to do so.
Jen, is the adult ed also shared with Auburn like it used to be when Bill was there, or?
The directorship?
Yeah, so for those of you who are unaware, Jen actually runs adult ed in both Lewiston and Auburn, and we do have some cost sharing and offsets connected to that. But
Right. The only share is that the director is shared. The programs are actually separate. Correct.
So the
Yes.
programming is basically separate, just managed by you and.
Yes, the subsidies are all separate, which is actually very helpful to both programs. We actually apply for grants mostly as a hub now. So they're regionalized grants that include grants for Androscoggin and Oxford counties. That was a change that was made for adult education a few years ago. So we share the application process and the funding stream for major grants.
Questions for Jen? Oh,
Great.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
so we have some notes from different questions that popped up tonight. We weren't able to answer. We'll get some answers for you and get that back to you. We'll take any questions that you have now and any follow-up items that you want us to be looking for or bringing back to you. Our next meeting is Wednesday, where we are looking to have our administrative team come in and share some bright spots, the different things that are happening in our district from schools and programming perspective. And also I'll do some more work in here from tonight's feedback from the line by line items and try to bring some things back to you. And then in a short turnaround, trying to make sure we're preparing something that's more reflective of the work you've already done for our meeting on Monday with the city council. Yeah, please.
Thank you. So we have received a couple emails in regards to different programming that either they want to keep or add on to. Are we going to get presentations on that Wednesday, like, will that cover some of that? Or should we direct those specific questions to you or Sue, or like, how does that work?
I guess to start, make sure you share them to me. I may not be getting the same things you're getting. I might be, but I might not be. I would share that along, and then principals and directors may be sharing things about different programming that's happening. So I also don't want to. We've kind of gone a full court press to start this on purpose, and I tried to share that approach with you to start. We have another month plus of budget season, if you will. So I like that we started fast and we're aggressive, but I still think we have a lot of time to go through different pieces and also be talking about things that the committee may want to have and looking for ways to fund those.
Mr. Bopont?
Thank you. I'm just looking at the agenda that's been sent out to us for the Wednesday, March 15th meeting by your executive secretary. And again, there's no public commentary.
We made a note of that. And we'll get that changed.
Thank you.
And I apologize. The genesis of that was that we had budget meetings, which are public and they involve, and then we had some time sensitive things like the grant and things like that that we put in. So that's our mistake. We'll get
Thank
that
you.
fixed.
Ms. Whitlow?
Going back to the budget, what article is the nutrition part of? Is that support staff? I'm just curious. I got a question on.
Yep.
So the nutrition budget is not in any of the articles. It lives in its own fund, so it's not part of any of these documents.
Okay, because I just wasn't sure if we were going to be helping out that budget at all, or if we were still good with it. And I was just kind of curious, because I know that in negotiations, we kind of talked about like with the pay raises and stuff that they were given, how that would affect their bottom line. And so that's good to know. As of right now, we're still good and they're supporting it.
So as of right now, we're still good. We walk a very thin line, staying in the black with nutrition. And so I say optimistically, we're still good, but I still think that there could be a point in time where we have to have a conversation about putting some money in the local fund to fund nutrition. And I think to your point, as those increases go up, if the federal dollars of reimbursement don't increase to that same pace, then we may see ourselves in an area where we have to raise funds for nutrition. Right now, large in part, publicly funded through federal supports and state supports around nutrition for students.
Where can I find Title I funds and the breakdown of how those are spent?
So you can find that on our website. The website has all of our Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, all of those budgets are there. I can send you the link.
Yeah,
those.
no, yeah, that'd be great. It's not something that would be included in our binder.
No, it's not part of the local budget, and it's not part of what is voted on by the community.
Do we have some things in the Title I budget? I don't even know how to word this. Are there cost saving things with Title I? Can we allocate it wrong? Well, yeah, I guess that's how I could say it. Like, are there some things that are in Title I that maybe shouldn't be, that we could free up? And those funds that we free up can be used in our current budget. I don't know how else to word what I'm asking, but.
So they're two separate budgets in that one is to supplement the local budget in the areas that they're dedicated for. So I'll use one that's a little less complicated. So Title III is a title federal grant that is specifically for our multilingual learners.
Mhm.
And there are very specific things that we can spend the Title III funds on. And we have to provide a plan on how we're going to spend those funds. We have to provide a budget, and it's approved by the state And those guidelines are given to the state by the federal government. And then we're monitored on how we're spending those funds. So that's true for all Title I, Title II, Title IV, Title III. All of those title funds are that same process. So there isn't, we're not able to take things from our local budget and put them in to any of those titles. Once something has been in our local budget, we can't then put it into one of those title grants. We can do the opposite. We can take something from our title funds and put them into our local budget. So.
Okay, so that's the opposite of what I was hoping for. That was.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of language around supplanting is what they call it. So again, like Karen said, if it exists here, we cannot put it there. And so that's a cumbersome piece. Sometimes what we'll try to do, I think we did this last year, maybe with one position or two, but we shared it up front, was to move something from title to the local, in part because the cost of benefits in title are federal based. So a person is actually roughly 16% more in title than they would be if they were local. So sometimes we try to free up title, but we can't go the other way with it. That's just part of the law.
I have one more question. So back to the original email that you sent out on March 8th, well, the public letter that you put out with the potential reductions. Thank you. That was not coming off my tongue. Expeditionary learning. Did you touch upon that at all? Because I don't recall hearing that on Wednesday's meeting. And is that what they're structured around at the middle school? Is this something that you'd be taking away and completely restructuring how they're learning at LMS?
So not looking to restructure how they're learning, but when expeditionary learning first got kind of introduced at the middle school level, the thought was to have someone that would help coordinate and build, the experiences and the interdisciplinary work. Working with Principal Winslow, Principal Bryant, she was married. Still learning. She believes that the teams have enough of the structure now, and with the leadership at the school, that they can continue to do the work they've been doing with the expeditionary learning and continue to grow, but without having a dedicated person in that role.
Okay.
So not a shift in the model, but a shift in the resource because it's up and running.
Okay. Thank you. That answers my question.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. So a couple of things. So I'm glad you touched upon the Title I, because that used to be a conversation we had part of our budget. And particularly because some of the questions I still have is around, how many ELL students we have, how many ELL teachers we have. And I know that some of that is part of the Title III funding, I believe, right? Because that's for the multilingual, that's not part of that.
So, yeah, all of our multilingual staff is in Article I. The Title III funds are, they're not funds that we necessarily use for staffing. They're funds that we use to enhance and expand what we can offer to our students beyond what we get for subsidy from the state.
Okay, so I guess I would like to know how many ELL students we have, how many ELL teachers we have, especially when we've had some drop in our enrollment, but also how many have we had that have tested out? Have we had, and has that conversation continued? Last year, that was part of a conversation. It was a conversation that happened with our legislators in respect to the difficulty sometimes in testing out and the needs that we had a whole bunch of Somali parents show up and say that, my kids don't need to take this test and they could do fine. So I think that we need to know a little bit more about those particular numbers. Another question I had in respect to, and I want to say that I really appreciate you printing out the stuff that we get in the emails. And I hope that we continue to have that because it's difficult. I like to have it all together in my book together so I don't have to keep going back to a different email and looking at things. It's all right there and easier to look at. And one of the questions we did have was around the teacher's pay and the adjusted scale on the teacher's pay. and those that are, got a little bit more of a percentage rate. And I'm wondering if we could just have, I know that this has been talked about before, but some are receiving like 4.6%. And some are receiving 3.2%. If you look at the whole thing, and it's not really explained in the contract around what specifically that is. And that is a question that has come up. I just want to put that out there. And that doesn't have to be answered tonight, but maybe Bruce or Tanya, if you can just write that out in an email so that we have the information, just so that I have it in my head to answer some questions that are coming out.
Well, most of that revolved around what was the what during the 2 years of negotiations that we put up with, that we became known as the secret decoder ring. That was, and there were some clauses in the pre-existing CBA that just were onerous and were preventing us from really being able to attract new staff. And after, I don't know how many meetings, we were able to finally reach consensus that it needed to be adjusted. And some of the existing staff did get some increase because of doing away with that particular clause in the contract. And restructuring the pay scale, and also with the additional monies for the special ed instructors. That's where some of those differences came from. It was a complicated mess, to say the least, but thanks to Sue and to Bill, I can't say enough about, our administrative staff being supportive for us with negotiations and getting us through that. But that's why there's some differential in there. There were a handful of existing educators that were identified as probably having been, I'm not going to say they were abused by that clause, but they certainly were probably affected negatively by that clause during almost their entire tenure previous to this contract. So we were able to make some adjustments there, and it will certainly allow us to do a better job of attracting experienced teachers in the future. Go ahead, Jane.
So just one example, I think it might help paint a picture. If you worked for Lewiston Public Schools for a couple of years, and then you went somewhere else for whatever reason, and then you returned to Lewiston Public Schools, there was some existing language in the contract that would not give you credit for the gap years. So if you taught here and then went to, say, Lisbon, and then came back here, you wouldn't get your years of service in Lisbon as experience because of the language of the contract. In this latest version, that went away. So we were able to reassess people and value their experience, all of it. And that was just pre-existing language from multiple contracts. And that's just one example of how you get some differentials. That's a tiny piece of it. Just want to give you an example.
Yeah, I'd love to explain I think the bigger issue was that so somebody coming here as a new teacher would look at the contract and they'd say, okay, I've got 10 years of service as a teacher, and look at our pay scale, and it'll just say steps 1 through 10, but it wouldn't actually, it was up to HR to say, they're going to decipher it, and they're going to say, well, this isn't 10 years experience on our pay scale. You might only get, let's say, step 7. So when people would get hired, they'd be like, I thought I was on step 10. No, you're on step 7. And it was a really hard contract to get new hires, really.
Just to add, so I think that's what Member Damon's referring to as the decoder ring. So it was a chart that was established in negotiations for how to place new staff. And I'll put it this way, years ago when I was a principal and someone said, roughly what do you think I'll make? And I would say, you'll have to talk to HR about that, because we couldn't pick the number knowing their experience on their resume. It went to a chart, and the chart was prorated in certain spots and not prorated in others. And I think for those who built it, it made sense. But for someone saying, hey, I got 5 years experience, what does that mean? This contract changed it to, you have 5 years experience instead of a prorated scale.
it added a significant degree of simplicity and clarity to the hiring process, to say the least.
Linda, what, did we answer any of your questions? Cause I don't know what the actual question was and, okay. Sorry, I guess the question was specifically why, when you look at the pay scale of the teachers, what was happening in the budget, some were going up, 2.87%, while others were going up 4.87%, and some were there was all of these different percentages. And usually when you look at a contract, you see that there's 3% this year, right? So that's where, go ahead, Janet.
So I think like the easy answer for that is there was a new state minimum of $40,000 for teachers. So that's part of it. That's part of why the percentages are off. And then it's the STEP program, depending on where you are, depends on the percentage more that you get on top of that raise that everybody got. So I think that's like the easy answer. Am I wrong?
I'll be about.
It had a lot to do with that. And of course, what happened when they raised the minimum, it pushed the entire scale up because there were a number of steps that were below that. So all of a sudden, the first two steps didn't make it. So by the time you got to step 3, now all of a sudden you had to be up at maybe like step 4 or 5 just to be able to, so there was a differentiation between step 1 and where you were at. So it pushed the whole thing up, and that just skewed the whole scale all over the place. But it's a one-shot deal. Hopefully we'll be able to keep that now in place, and going forward it'll be simpler and hopefully more equitable. That
So
was the goal.
I just want to make sure that I can answer questions that are coming to me without not being part of that particular negotiation and knowing some of those specifics. And, when we talk pennies, we're talking pennies on the city level too, right? So I just want to be able to say, I need to have ammunition in my pocket, to put it lightly, to make sure that I can answer those questions. So those are not things we're looking at and somebody saying, comparing that to like our police contract, right? Where there was a significant, thank you. But do you know what I'm saying? I just want to be able to answer questions properly.
I would also add that that's not even a negotiable anymore because it already went through negotiations and it's a contract. So there's absolutely nothing that can be done about that. It's in stone. Before we adjourn, I promised my children I would ask. They would like to know if there is a snow day tomorrow. And I have gotten numerous little pings on my watch tonight. Mom, is the superintendent there? Mom, can you ask if there's a snow day tomorrow? So I just wanted to throw it out there before we adjourn.
I will pledge this to you and to our student body and staff. Before I leave tonight, I'll take a look at the weather. If I'm able to make a decision, I will share that out tonight. But I think the timing of this one is going to be tricky because of that later day start. I hate to break hearts and wishes, but I really think that this might be a morning call because we have to see what that storm does overnight. I know that's not very popular.
Thank you. I'm also wondering, and this is probably like a you question and a Sue question. I don't particularly, pre-K is one of those things where I kind of don't really understand like who funds it, like with the special education, like that's not technically us. Like I feel like there's a lot of weird things that kind of go on there. And then looking at your list of cuts, it looks like you're cutting a potential pre-K position. I'm assuming that's because of enrollment. We all did get an email from the pre-K team stating that a few things, that there was potential, and again, I don't know if this is fact or not, but potential for some grant money that could be applied for some positions, whether that be half day or full day. And I'm wondering if that's a potential something that we can like look at and see where we're at there. That's potential cost savings in our budget if there's grant money available to provide those salaries for our teacher positions. And then also look hard too at our full day program. I know you had mentioned that that's something that you're thinking of not offering, but I think we also have an obligation to our community. Childcare is a real hard struggle for a lot of people. I know when I had both my children, I was on a list the day I got pregnant for childcare. And I know a lot of the problem with public pre-K is that it's not a full day program. So a lot of parents can't do that 9 to noon or noon to 3. And if we did offer a full day pre-K program, would that offer up more spots available in local daycare for other people to take those spots if we did offer some sort of full day program? So just something to look at, something to kind of toss around. Thank you.
Thank you. So actually Megan and I have had a conversation outside of this. And I'm kind of, if we're going to have a conversation about this, I just want to play devil's advocate for a minute. As someone who is a preschool teacher, I do not think we should have full day pre-K in public schools. The attention span of a 4-year-old, the naps, when you look at the logistics of what you're doing all day, I don't think we should have like a full day childcare and label it as pre-kindergarten, because it would turn into childcare. And if we're going to offer childcare, great, let's offer childcare. But I just don't think we should be calling pre-K or calling childcare pre-K and doing it for a full day. I work with 3 and 4-year-olds, and 3 hours is plenty of time for them. And they are wiped after 3 hours. And we get maybe 30 to 45 minutes of actual instruction time with them in that 3 hours. And I don't know what the schedule is for public pre-K. I don't know what their day looks like. I'm assuming it's pretty similar to my day in a private pre-K, but I'm of the opinion that we should not go full day pre-K 5 days a week. I just think they're too little. I feel like we've already turned kindergarten into first grade, and I don't love the idea of turning pre-K into kindergarten. And that's kind of what that feels like to me. So I just want to throw that out there if we're going to have that conversation.
Ms. Scott.
I just want to give everybody an update. We were supposed to have our first budget overview meeting tomorrow evening, but it's now been postponed till Thursday evening because of the snow, because our meeting wasn't supposed to start till 6, and most likely that's going to be the worst part. So we'll be doing that on Thursday evening. So Thursday, we're going to have at 5:30, we have executive session first, and then we're going to go from there right into the budget overview, and then budget work session on personal services, capital outlay, general government, which is property and parking, and public works. So it's gonna be a long night.
Motion to adjourn?
We all set as far as the budget discussion is concerned? The motion to adjourn by Ms. Bowden. Is there a second?
Second.
The second by Ms. Scott. All in favor?